Alrighty, we are live for another episode of Anxiety in Athletes. Today, we have the fabulous guest that we had last week coming back with us, Cali Werner. Really excited to have everybody here. Excited to have Cali here. Going to be a really good episode. We're going to dive into superstition versus what is OCD and the difference between the two, and kind of dissect what's healthy and what's unhealthy, and what coaches could look out for in their own locker rooms and on the court, on the field. And we're kind of going to dive into what Cali went through as a college athlete, and what she goes through now regarding obsessions and compulsions and the OCD aspect of athletics and her athletic career, and competition, but also what superstition and how she was able to kind of decipher the two and separate that. Before we get started, just a little bit about Cali. She's a familiar face, obviously, because she was on the last episode, but she's an athlete and a clinician at the McLean OCD Institute in Houston, and she's obtaining her PhD at Baylor University. Her research focuses on competitive athletes with debilitating anxiety that negatively impacts their performance. Her struggle with OCD began at the young age of 4, and she did not receive appropriate treatment until she was competing as a D1 athlete at Rice University, also known as the Harvard of the South. I think that's what they call it. She calls it. I don't know, but I'll give her it. All right. While at Rice, though, Cali had a lot of success. 9 conference championships, was named an honorable mention All-American in the 10K race. Cali was able to reignite that love for her sport after receiving that appropriate evidence-based care, ERP. Cali hopes to help others with their mental illness and knows that, and help them feel not alone, and give them hope, and that she wants them to let people know that appropriate treatment is available, to re-obtain that joy that mental illness takes away from all of us that deal with mental illness. She recently qualified and competed in the U.S. Olympic Trials Marathon in 2020. And while she keeps advocating, she's also pursuing her passion for her sport. She also wrote a amazing children's book. It's called Anxious Annie. It's on Amazon and pretty much everywhere, right?
Barnes and Noble
platform. So she's going to talk a little bit about her book. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about. Yeah, it's linked in the comments. We'll talk a little bit about her book here. Really exciting. I know, it's going to be a really good resource, especially if Cali had OCD when she was 4 and didn't get the proper treatment. But if we can kind of educate younger generations, I think that's what Cali's trying to do, and it's going to be a really great resource for a lot of people. Before we get started, I just want to remind everybody, this live stream is intended to serve as educational content, so not intended to replace therapy and proper treatment. For those treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The IOCDF is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you are in a crisis or you are ever feeling unsafe or suicidal, please go to your local emergency room. There's plenty of help available. Call 911 or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 800-273-8255. Also, just to note, we want to create this to be a safe space as possible, and be kind, respect everyone. We are one community here. With that being said, remember, you're on social media platforms and being recorded. This episode is being recorded, as always, so be mindful that if you ask personal questions or leave comments, they're there to be seen. But at the end of the day, we're here to support each other. I'll stop talking now. I know you're done with my spiel. We want to get to Cali and about her story. All right, so Cali, tell us a little bit about, not receiving that proper treatment growing up, and then kind of recognizing how it was invading into your athletic career. Just kind of get us started here about when you kind of found that treatment.
Yeah, so I, like anyone's OCD, had OCD that would wax and wane, right? So looking back, there's times where I think, oh my goodness, life would have just been so much easier if I would have been able to receive this treatment at an earlier time. But then there were other times in my life where things were pretty good, when I had less stressors. And then there was a pretty consistent point in my life where OCD was very prominent and debilitating. When my last 2 years of high school, symptoms got more severe because I had more success with running and put a lot of pressure on myself there. And so then I went to college, and that first year of college, I was injured. And so symptoms went down because I wasn't competing, but then they ramped right back up as I started to get success in running with college. And so there was quite a bit of frustration that I had to work through of, wow, why did it take me this long to get treatment? Because there were so many milestones in my life where I wish I would have been able to get it, because I did respond pretty quickly to ERP and started to get my life back very quickly. And so it seemed to me like, oh, that would have been such an easy fix. Well, as we know, exposures aren't easy to do, but much better than dealing with OCD for long extended periods of time. And so there were times where I would get frustrated just thinking about how, as an athlete, I would tell someone my story because I didn't know it was OCD. I didn't receive the diagnosis until 21, as you said. And so I remember thinking to myself, well, it's weird that I have to round off my watch to an even number when I'm going for a run, or I have to run that extra mile because it just felt wrong to stop at that last mile. And I would have people tell me when I would share that story about how frustrating it was, because it did feel debilitating for me to stop if the mileage felt off in regards to anxiety. I would have people say, oh, well, no wonder you're such a good runner. Like, if you have OCD, that's helping you, right? Is with the message I was given. So to me, at that time in my life, I thought, well, then I shouldn't get treatment because I want to be a great runner. And so that held me back from getting treatment quite a bit too, because I was worried it would change my performance, which, as we know, is not the case at all, or the message that
definitely not
be giving. And so I waited and hit a point of burnout to where, like OCD grows like cancer would grow, right? So then my symptoms exasperated more because I wasn't receiving treatment, and it wasn't just rounding off that mileage. It was having to round off that mileage, tie my shoes 10 times, or I got to a point where I had so many sexual and harm intrusive thoughts that I was afraid to go into places that I would be alone in public, like a bathroom or anything like that. And so it's painful to kind of look back at those times where I didn't have appropriate treatment, but it's also a reminder of how resilient I am because of the fact that I had to white knuckle it and then finally did get treatment, and now can give this message to others so that they don't wait that long.
Yeah, for sure. I think, what we've tried to start here in the Anxiety and Athletes Initiative and with the website, our message is consistent. We want to preach that OCD doesn't help your athletic career, just like it doesn't help non-athletes with their lives. Like it doesn't help school. It doesn't help. OCD helps nothing. Maybe it makes you a stronger person. I know it made me a stronger person. It still does, and going through it's tough, but it doesn't enhance our careers or, the stuff we're trying to accomplish, the things we want to do in life. So I think, that's one message that we're really trying to push and really try to get across here, is that OCD is never going to help us. And by trying to eliminate it, you're actually going to be a better athlete. Whereas you've been told your whole life to put in that extra work and make sure that, you're leaving no stone unturned and your best effort. But at some point, the best effort turns into an obsession of perfection, right? And I think, for a lot of athletes, that whole cliche of, you might not be most talented in the room, but there's no reason somebody should outwork you. And I love work ethic. I'm all about it. But when it turns to what was your experience, recognizing that work ethic was turning into OCD?
I started to notice, well, actually it was brought to my parents' attention. So I went home for Christmas break. I was living in college. And then when I went home, my parents, I had told them over the phone, I was calling them, asking for tons of reassurance around intrusive thoughts and all of these things, but they didn't really notice until I was there with them in person. And that's when they said, this isn't normal. We need to make sure that we get you help. I don't know what that looks like. And it took a little while for me to receive therapy. But that was them seeing just like how much time I was spending in my head. I mean, it was bad enough to where it was at a point where I wasn't hearing anything that anyone was telling me because I was just replaying so many things over and over and over, analyzing. But I also wanted to go back to something that I thought was really important that you just said, Tom, is that it hurts performance so much. And when I say that I was resilient, I think I look at like what I was still able to accomplish in those races when I was struggling as much as I was struggling. But then I always think to myself too, but like, imagine how much more I would have been able to accomplish if I wasn't
right.
two things, right? So for somebody that I always use the example of like turns in an essay that doesn't have OCD, it's 10 times harder for that individual that does have OCD to turn in that essay. And I know everyone here that struggled with OCD could probably relate to, or just go back to a time where they have exhausted themselves by some type of trigger that they've had, right? Like, has anyone, comment in the chat box, of course, but had that experience where you've just been so triggered and completely exhausted yourself, like you were forced to take a nap because you overdid your fight or flight response. And so I did that before every race. So I can't imagine what it would have been like if I didn't have to deal with that on top of getting to the starting line.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I know for myself personally, I was saying it the other day that I almost felt like there was a part of me that I missed out on. You know what I mean? Like I feel like a lot of people with OCD, I know for me, when I started, I was doing 12 to 14 hours of compulsions a day when I was at rock bottom. And I was telling one of my friends, like, all of a sudden you get, even 7 or 8 of those hours back after going through treatment and taking medication, and just recognizing that, okay, now I get 7 or 8 of those hours back. Like, who am I? And so that's kind of something I struggled with. And I think just kind of recognizing that time doesn't necessarily mean, okay, go put in extra work and obsess about perfection in your sport. And I think a lot of times, that's what I turned to was training in the weight room, or okay, well, I have extra time now, so I'll just spend all my time training. And I think people, especially college athletes and high school athletes, are it's ingrained in their mind to work because they're trying to prove something to their sport coaches. I'm interested to hear kind of about what your experience with your sport coaches was like, and how they either enabled you to keep pushing, and pursue that perfection, and or how they helped you kind of tone it, take it back a step and recognize that. Before you answer that, just a reminder, everybody, throw your questions in the comment box for Cali. We want to, we'll field any questions we want to talk about. If there's anything specific that you want to talk about, feel free to throw it out there. We'll definitely get to it. How about a beer? Thank you for your comment. We're glad to have you here. And Neil, it's great to see you. Well, not see you, but see your name. We miss you. All right, Callie. So yeah, just go ahead. Tell me a little bit about your experience with sport coaches, strength coaches, such as myself. I want to know what helped and what didn't help.
Yeah. So I did a pretty decent job of hiding my OCD from my coaches for a long time, and I look back and I wish that I wouldn't have, because my coach was very understanding when it got to a point where it was impossible to hide it. But I had this ingrained fear that I couldn't let anyone know that I was struggling because I was a scholarship athlete. And so I needed to perform and suck it up and just deal with it. And that hurt me, of course, right? Like it wasn't until the point where like I knew that I wasn't going to be able to function or get to the starting line that I did tell a coach. And it was such an incredible experience for me, because my main coach at Rice had an athlete before who's been really successful, ended up writing a book about his journey. and he was a marathon runner who struggled with pretty severe OCD. Pastor Jeff Wells is a huge advocate for the Houston area, but he had been coached by my coach, and so my coach was very aware of a lot of the subjects of OCD, and I had no idea. And so when I did tell him, he was supportive and was kind of just, I mean, for me, for anyone that's not a clinician or an OCD advocate that is really into it, I always say they're probably going to give you some form of reassurance, right? That actually feeds the cycle. And so I was with him for a while for quite a bit of reassurance, not knowing that was feeding the cycle, because he didn't want to see me suffering in the moment, right? And no family members or loved ones, they have good intentions when they say those reassurance type answers, but that part was a little bit of a struggle. And I think I've mentioned this in the last talk that we did, but I started seeking out therapy over Christmas break, and I ended up getting referred to someone who referred me to a hypnotherapist. And as a Christian that struggled with scrupulosity, it completely exasperated my symptoms. And so it was even bumpy when I did start the treatment journey again at 21, but then finally got plugged into an ERP therapist. And even that, I think there's a lot of stigma around that too, of, well, if you have to try different therapists, it's not that the therapist is the problem, it's you're the problem. And that's not the case at all, right? It's
right.
incorrect therapy. And sometimes even in ERP, you have to be able to find a therapist that you can relate to and build rapport with. And so it was quite an interesting journey, to say in the least, but I felt very fortunate to have supportive individuals in my life throughout the process. It was just a matter of speaking up about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, one thing that I remember going through, three therapists, two or three, before I clicked with the right one and found one that, was willing to be on. She didn't have an ACE, but she was willing to take me in, and actually was, practiced ERP and understood it and was certified in it, really could actually go through ERP with me instead of, laying down on a couch and talking, because I would leave those sessions and it was like I was walking on certain tiles while I was leaving. I was doing compulsions while I was leaving the building, and I was like, why am I not getting better? Well, here's the reason: because that evidence-based treatment that we talk about, ERP, maybe that and the combination of medication, those are the things that work. And it's not our fault if we don't treat ERP, and so, or if we don't find someone that treats our ERP, because we didn't really know what ERP was until we actually stumbled upon it. I know for me, at least, I had no clue what that kind of therapy was until I got there and was facing my obsessions head on and sitting with that excruciating anxiety. So I think, one thing we can kind of do better is, as coaches and as people in athletics, is kind of understanding the different types of treatment, mental illness, and as a whole, there's so much to be done in the athletic community. Obviously that's why we're here right now talking about it. I think the more we talk about it, the less taboo it gets, because it's still one of those topics for some reason that, if you see someone with a broken arm, you're not going to say, hey, move your arm, or a broken leg, you're not going to say walk. But when someone has to pull back, like the situation with the tennis player right now, didn't want to speak to the media because she's facing depression. And, for the mental health community, that's a huge thing. And we support her in what she's doing, because that takes a lot of courage to sacrifice, her competition for her making a decision for her own personal health. But the fact that she's facing so much backlash right now means we have so much further to go. And so it's just, it's frustrating, but it means that our work's cut out for us at the same time. We have a question. Did you ever have moments when you would tell yourself, I'm on a scholarship and athletes on scholarship should, oh, great. Wow. That's Fran. Thank you so much. Should perform better than how I perform right now? And follow-up question, did this compound on your OCD to make it worse? I'll let you answer first, and we'll kind of go from there.
Perfect. So I did have moments where, especially my first year at Rice, so I was injured and I knew I was on a full scholarship. And so in the back of my head, even though my anxiety was a little bit less intense because I wasn't competing, there was this pressure of, oh my goodness, I need to get better because I'm expected to win all these races. And that definitely probably fed into my anxiety and did not help my OCD in the slightest to get better. So it was a struggle that I had, and had to constantly remind myself that, my worth is more than what I'm performing or than what I'm doing to perform on the track or in cross country. And
Right.
I had to tell myself that often, and like just remind myself too. A lot of coaches would say, well, we don't care what you do within the community or things like that. But I had a coach that did care. And so I had to remind myself too, like, okay, I'm bringing things to my team just by being here and sharing my struggle, whether I'm competing or not. And so some of those types of reminders took the pressure off just enough, but it was a constant thing that I had to remind myself of because that fear is very real. And I think I answered that it did make my OCD worse.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I'm just so blindsided about how great that screen name is. How about a beer? Honestly, how about a beer? I would love a beer. All right, so I agree. I mean, I think recognizing that it made it worse. How did you kind of recognize what was superstition? Did you have any superstitions? And how did you kind of decipher which was healthy superstition? Because, there are people that have pregame rituals, whatever it is. Like I listened to the same playlist before every basketball game, whatever it was. How did you kind of decipher what was superstition or a pregame ritual and what was actual compulsion and actually taking away from your athletic career?
This is one of my favorite questions of all time. So we know that when we look at diagnostic criteria for OCD, it's the amount of compulsions that you're engaging in. It has to take like an hour out of your day you're engaging in these. And so most people, we would say, have some type of symptom of OCD, right? Most people would maybe like double check their stove to make sure that it's off, or would engage in some kind of activity that would be considered a compulsion to the outside eye for someone with OCD. But I love Dr. Grayson's video on OCD in the brain. So in this video, he talks about the biological component of OCD and how if OCD is biologically active at that time. So for somebody that is not struggling with OCD, they could engage in a superstitious behavior and forever they will go to that baseball plate and just tap their bat on both sides 4 times and it won't turn into anything else. But if you have OCD and if it's biologically active at that time, it can easily latch onto that one superstitious behavior that seems harmless and make it, okay, well, I can't just tap my bat on both sides of the plate 4 times. I actually also have to shake the gate 4 times. And then I have to make sure that I do something in a multiple of 4 so that it turns into 8. And then little by little, that one compulsion can
compounds. Yeah.
Right. And so that's where it crosses over. So if you have OCD versus if you don't, it can be harmless for one person, but very detrimental for someone that's struggling with OCD.
Yeah, I think that's always really funny. Not funny, but what people always say when it's like, oh, it's only 4, like it's not that bad. Like I had someone say to me actually a few weeks ago, like, oh, like your number is like 5. Like that's not, someone that doesn't really know a lot about OCD is like, oh, that's not that bad. Like just do it 5 times. I'm like, no, but I have like just right OCD. So when it doesn't feel right on the 5th time, then I do it another 5 times. And then it doesn't feel right on the 2nd try, on the 10th try. And then I do it another 5 times. And that 5 turns into 105. And now I'm there for 35 minutes. So like, and they were like, oh, and I'm like, yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty discomforting. And I think that's kind of a misconception is like, oh, he has to tie his shoes 5 times. Like if he has to do that to play well, so be it. And I think it's easy to fall into that trap because how much I know as an athlete, for me, it meant so much to me that, okay, why wouldn't I just do it 5 times? Just like when it would attack my family and we would say like one of my obsessions was my family's gonna die in a car accident. Okay, well my family means so much to me, so I'll just do this 5 times. So I so just so they're okay, because my family means so much to me. So obviously I'm just going to do it for them. But then that turns into that 105 times because I can't stop and because it compounds. So I think one thing for me is as I keep going through maintenance with my treatment, I think that's so vital is not giving into those little moments like that and just kind of letting a little bit in, because once you give OCD, an inch and it takes a mile, right? And so
Right.
that's kind of where I've struggled. Even just putting weight on the bar for me, oh, I could just take this on and put it on and take it off again 5 times because I don't want to miss this clean, like whatever it is. But then realizing that now I've spent 25 minutes putting weight and taking it off, and now I'm fatigued, and now I'm gonna miss this clean anyways. You know what I mean? Like it. So that's what we're saying is OCD doesn't help your athletic career. And when I'm in the moment, I'm like, oh, like I might as well just do this. But then here we are, and I'm tired, and it is detrimental.
Yeah. And I like that you said, even in your journey right now, where you're at with maintenance, because I have my own techniques that help me too to stay in that maintenance phase instead of the relapse phase, which we don't want to fall into.
Right.
And me, when I have that conversation with myself of like, especially before some kind of competition or race or just any big life stressor, if I'm going to take an exam for PhD program, whatever it is, I will want to be on good terms with everyone. That's a compulsion that I still struggle with to this day, of needing to over apologize or feeling like if I don't, then my competition or whatever it is will lack. And so for me, I would come up with this way in my head that I could apologize, but then I recognize what I'm doing. And so I'll remind myself of, oh, but when I apologize, what's the loophole going to be? Because OCD always finds a loophole, right? And so if I can say, oh, I'm going to apologize, but then I'm going to feel like I didn't fully apologize for that. And so is it really even worth it? Because it's just going to be this never ending train. Or reminding myself before the competition comes up, like months before even, of what are my OCD triggers? Because if I can be aware of what triggers me, then I'm going to be much more likely to be preventative and not fall into that trap.
Right. No, I like that a lot. One thing I want to touch on, how about a beer? Still coming with the great questions here. Talking about just right OCD, that feeling. So just right OCD is, you do things until it feels just right. So it's very self-explanatory, but when you look at that just right, it can feel different for everybody. Like for me personally, if I do things just right on the 5th time and it feels just right, that usually means that I'm doing a mental ritual, like saying something to my mind, like, okay, if this is the 5th time I'm doing something, my family won't die in a car crash, and it would feel just right. And then it doesn't necessarily feel euphoric because I still have the obsession in my mind about it, but I'm able to kind of move on. And so that's what my just right OCDs. It's a lot about mental compulsions of repeating things and telling myself that obsession is not going to happen while I'm tapping something or while I'm doing the compulsion. So it's kind of like 2 compulsions at the same time. Somehow, I can't walk and chew gum at the same time, but I can do 2 compulsions at the same time. For some reason, I don't know. I mean, it's just haven't mastered the former, but the latter seems to be really easy for me. But I think that's kind of, I can joke all I want, but I think that's definitely something that I've struggled with is recognizing that it is 2 compulsions kind of into one thing, affecting that just right OCD.
Yeah, just like with any trigger, right? If you picture something triggering you, so for Tom, if you feel like you have to do something in a multiple of 5, and let's say you had that just right feeling. So first off, you think I have to do this in a multiple of 5 or this terrible thing will happen. And so your anxiety will go up, and then you do it. And if you do it just right, then anxiety immediately goes down. And so to me, I think of like, oh, a temporary weight gets lifted off my shoulders, but it is so temporary, right? Because then the next step that you make, you're going to have to do that
right
all over again. So that's what I describe it as, is like this temporary weight lifted off my shoulders because I don't feel as high of anxiety.
Right. I'm going to draw something out here.
OCD cycle.
So we talk about the anxiety curve. Yeah. So when we're talking about anxiety curve, so here's my terrible drawing, everybody. So on my Boston Celtics pad, go Celtics. I have my Tom Brady shirt on too. So really just sporting the Boston sports today. All right. So when we talk about compulsions, right? So it's that jagged line, up, down, up, down, up. Oh, going off the page, up, down, up, down, up, down. So
blurry. It's pretty blurry. I don't know if it's blurry for others, but I can't see it on my
so
screen.
pretty much like what OCD does, right? So when we obsess and then we want that immediate relief, and then we do that compulsion, but then that obsession comes peaks and valleys the whole time. And what ERP does, for those of you who understand, are we good?
You cut out, but you're back.
All right, cool. Yes, it's scary. All right. So what ERP does, just go and understand what ERP is. We sit with that discomfort of the obsession, and instead of it going up, down, but because we're doing the compulsion so many times, it just keeps going up, and we're not doing the compulsion. Our anxiety is excruciating, but over time it just decreases, and it might take a few hours, and it might take, it might not be the whole session, or it might be 5 hours or 7 hours for that anxiety to really die down. But over time it gets less and less, and you realize that you're able to live with it. So, I think we're both kind of, I think everybody that goes through ERP knows how difficult it is and what a challenge it is to sit with that, but are also usually many of the people that I have met that have gone through ERP treatment are big advocates for it, because they recognize the importance and how vital it was to their journey of recovery.
Yeah. I had a professor tell me one of my favorite things, and it'll stick with me forever, in my class the other day. Research isn't really research, it's me search. And so the same goes for therapy, right? Like, so many therapists or clinicians that are working in the field are doing it because of their own struggle that they've had, that they can relate to the individual, or a loved one that they're really close to, that they've walked on that journey with.
Right. Just kind of shifting gears here, how did you kind of see, what kind of superstitions did you have going through college, through your journey as a Division I athlete? What kind of superstitions did you have? Not compulsions, but what were things that you kind of wanted to do before competition?
Yeah, there were very few. When I look back at the things that I did to help my competition, there were very few superstitions that just stayed as they were superstitions. That did not turn into OCD for me. So one that I remember that I actually, would recommend for a distance runner is, I had a staple go-to meal the night before the race and the day of the race, because I knew that worked well with my stomach, and that I would be okay to run the race. So I'd always eat oatmeal with peanut butter and a banana when I would perform in the morning. And if I had a longer distance race, I would eat pasta. And actually, I recognized that the night before a race became a compulsion for me, because I look back now and I tried to play with not eating pasta, and it was extremely freeing, like, to be able to say, wow, I was able to eat something different and perform, because I would eat pasta for a 5K, and I know not everyone watching is a distance runner, but you don't, for anything below a 10K, you don't really have to.
You don't necessarily, right.
And so for me to be able to break free of that habit, you would think always oh my gosh, this is so anxiety provoking, and maybe the first time it is, but afterwards I just felt extremely free from that. So it did turn into a compulsion afterwards. But there were superstitions that I did that were superstitions for a little while before they turned into a compulsion, which was
right.
Yeah, I would wear the same socks or the same sports bra before a race, until I learned that became a compulsion, because I forgot the sports bra once and had a complete meltdown. So that was definitely one. And then I got to a point where I had to take all of my jewelry. I used to wear pearl earrings before every race, and I would take those off And I would only allow myself to I have really thick hair, and I needed to get the hair out of my face for a race. And I would only allow myself 2 bobby pins when I really needed more than 2. But I had convinced myself that if I did that, it would weigh me down and I would lose the race. And so little things like that. And you said your number was 5, my number was 4. And so I did a lot of things in 4. And if it didn't feel right, it was time. So in in high school, my high school coach actually got to a point where he was tying my shoes for me before the race because I could not get to the starting line in time, and got way too close to missing a couple of races.
Oh, God.
So he would tie my shoes for me. And to this day, if I, like, for the trials, I talked a little bit about it on the Peace of Mind, the week of the trials, but my OCD symptoms kind of exacerbated again around that time. And that was a huge learning experience for me. But the shoe tying was a tough one that I dealt with leading up to the trials. And I could talk more about that, but wanted to answer all the superstition questions first.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how you suffered with this compulsion of the shoe tying earlier on, and then as you're competing after college, it comes back. Why do you think that it came back? Obviously, with OCD, things just kind of pop up. I know I've had thoughts where, I remember one time when I was a freshman in high school playing basketball at practice. I remember going out to practice, changing the locker room, going out to practice, but I didn't close the door right to my locker. And so I was literally like all practice excusing myself to go to the bathroom. Like, people probably were like, dude, why do you have to go to the bathroom again? Like, you just went. But I had to go close the door again. And I just remember that being a problem. But then when I was at I had a locker in the locker room at my job, I'm having trouble closing the locker door again. I'm like, okay, this is weird. Like, having really weird deja vu back to freshman year, and how I couldn't do that. I think it's interesting how OCD shows up, goes away, takes different things, and then shows back up in the same way from 4 years ago.
Yeah, I think there's a few components to that. One, you completed that habit for so long before you got appropriate treatment, right? And so OCD is always trying to go against you and trying to pull you back into a slippery slope. And so if you picture like these neural pathways in your brain, that one has been molded so deeply that it's just so easy to fall back into that trap, but it takes a little bit more effort not to engage in those behaviors. And so in times of stress, like for me, being about to be competing in the trials, it was way more tempting for my brain to say, oh, but let's check those shoes one more time, than to go the other route. And to give a little bit more detail on what happened that week. So when I was 21, my symptoms were at their absolute worst. And that week for sure was deja vu before the trials, because my symptoms were worse than they had been since I was 21. And at this time, I was a clinician at McLean. And so I remember thinking to myself, wait, as a clinician, you cannot be struggling this way. That's not allowed to happen. And you have to go back after the trials and work with other clients. How can you do that because I was not just struggling with just right OCD, but a lot of sexual intrusive thoughts and all these other things. And so to me, I'm actually kind of glad that I had that experience, because I forgot what I tell my patients all the time. Like, I needed to practice what I preach, and that, like, oh yeah, I am human. And hard times in life might bring up a lot of symptoms too, right? And I don't need to feel defeated. This isn't a complete relapse. This is just a really stressful week for me. And I have to learn to just get back on top of this before it gets to that point. And then sure enough, when I got back home and things settled, it was easier for me to lean into exposures. And I was able to pick up where I left off, but it would have saved myself a lot of heartache and more anxiety if I would have just reminded myself, oh yeah, this is part of the process. Like, this is part of the OCD journey.
Right. I really like what you said there, the practice what you preach thing, because it's so funny, because 3 weeks ago when I'm doing the first episode, obviously nobody knows this, but I was having a really tough week that week. And, I'm saying, like, in my head while I'm talking to, the MLB player John Buck, about my OCD, and I'm in my head like, who am I to be on here and talk about, my recovery while I'm compulsing, an hour before, and been kind of struggling, not in a relapse, but just having a few tough days in a row. Who am I to be sharing my story? And I think that's, not to go off on a tangent, but I think that's sometimes as advocates, what we forget when we've been doing this for a while, as long as myself and you have, we aren't perfect. I know for me personally, far from it. And I still am, in that maintenance of making sure that my OCD doesn't fall back to where it was, or even crawl back there at all. And so I think it's important to remember, the reason we advocate is because we go through the same or similar things as people that are struggling, and maybe we're farther along in our journey, but we still have that. We still have OCD. It's a chronic condition, and I think it's important to kind of give ourselves some empathy and recognize that it's more authentic for us to be struggling and still sharing our stories.
Yeah.
Real quick. No, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, to add on to that too, I think something that used to scare me when I was still very early on in my journey, and I would hear about other advocates saying that they still struggle at times, because I was like, well, I don't want to still struggle looking in the future. That scares me. But something that gives me comfort now, knowing that, okay, my journey does have its ups and downs, is that 9.9 times out of 10, I know what's happening. So like, I knew that week when I was struggling, that my OCD was bad, versus the first time when I was 21, I had no idea. I felt like I was going crazy and was
a lot scarier when you don't have any idea.
Yeah. And so the encouragement that I want to give you guys listening is that you have tools now that you never had before, and you cannot lose those tools no matter how you try. And so it never has to be like it was at its absolute worst.
Right. Even when, you're facing those obsessions and having a really tough day, it's a lot less lonely knowing what it is and what's going on. Because I remember, I know for you, you were diagnosed later on as well. And I was diagnosed, I was a little bit earlier than you, but I still was 16 years old, and I probably had it, prominently for 4 or 5 years before that. So just even like going through it and being on my own and not realizing what it is, because I didn't even know what it was, is a lot scarier, and you feel a lot more hopeless than when you understand what it is and can kind of separate it from yourself. You're not your OCD. It's something that you live with, but you're not it. And so just recognizing that, your identity isn't your OCD. Real quick, I appreciate how about a beer saying I'm a strong individual. I think, for me personally, it was a little embarrassing at first. Not embarrassing, but more so afraid of what other people will think of me. I think I was usually more embarrassed when somebody caught me in a compulsion, and I was really good at hiding it. But I was sharing this the other day. I remember one time specifically where I was walking in high school down the hallway, during a free period, and nobody else was in the hallway, and I was looking down because I used to step on certain tiles in the hallway, and thank God nobody was around, because kids in my school would have been like, what is this guy doing? It looked like I was skipping, practically playing hopscotch. And so I'll never forget, the headmaster was walking towards me, and I bumped into him because my head was down trying to look at the tiles, and you could tell like I had just been I had tears in my eyes. I was so distressed. And he walked me back to my class. And the reason I share that is just because it was more embarrassing to me. And did I just cut out again? Oh my gosh.
You did. Yeah.
It was more. Okay. So he walked me back to class, and just knowing that, he didn't know what was going on, and recognizing that I had to explain that was a little bit more, finding that shame, and less embarrassment, but more shame of having to share what it was. And I think, and the fact that he saw me unable to control myself, and unable to, have control of my life was more embarrassing than actually discussing what OCD was for me personally. But, I think it's when we'll talk more on a future episode about opening up about OCD with coaches, parents, teammates. But I know for me specifically, obviously, a lot of people here know my story. In college, I was working with a basketball team, and I confided in a coach that I really trusted, and I felt that for me to be my true self, that I should be fully transparent, and I was comfortable enough with these coaches that okay, I think I can tell them about my mental illness. And when I opened up, it ended up just being a year and a half of me being belittled and bullied to the point of me being back to where I was my sophomore year of high school. Now I'm a sophomore year in college, and now I'm back to where I square one, that rock bottom place, or at least pretty close to it, because of me opening up. So that was my situation. The first time I really opened up to adults, but for me now, I recognize that isn't going to be the case every time, and to recognize that okay, those people didn't respond right, and the way I'd want to be around people, that the people I'd want to be around are not people that would respond that way. And I think that's my mindset kind of shifted. Like, okay, some people might not respond the way with empathy and what we expect, but that doesn't mean that that means that those people that don't respond with empathy are probably not the people that you want around you in your circle of recovery, because I know for myself, they were making my recovery a lot worse. And so it's a tough lesson to learn as a 20-year-old, 21-year-old, but such is life, right? Like we grow up and we recognize who's good for us and who's bad, who's not going to support us in the way we need to be supported. And I think that was kind of, one situation where it did become embarrassing because they were bullying me so much. So for what I didn't think should be embarrassing, I was like, oh, wow, should I be embarrassed about this? Because I'm being bullied about it. So they obviously think it's weird, or, they're making fun of it. So obviously it's something that's really strange, or, and I think just to remember that it's OCD. It's not something that's so strange, and that we are normal people that deal with a chronic condition, just like someone with a physical illness deals with a chronic condition.
Yeah, I had a similar, a little bit of a different experience. I would say that as a clinician, or I started working in the field of treating OCD, I was hesitant to share my story because of, the stigma associated. Well, you have OCD, so you shouldn't be able to treat it, which is right. So wrong. And so I remember Dr. Bjorvensen actually telling me, well, you can share as much as your story as you want. Just remember, do it on your own time. And like, once it's out there, it's out there. And so that reminded me to kind of pace myself. And I would share a little bit here and there when I thought someone needed to hear it. And I got nothing but positive feedback in this environment, right? Like you said, Tom, if you're sharing it with the right people. And that feedback was, wow, this really made a difference. Like, I needed to know that I wasn't alone in this, or things like that. But to this day, there's a people from my hometown that follow my story on Instagram that I never, when I was in high school, opened up about my OCD journey with. And so to this day, when I talk about that and it goes on my Instagram story about harm intrusive thoughts or sexual intrusive thoughts, there's this part of me that kind of cringes and thinks, oh, I wonder what those individuals are going to think that don't know about OCD. But at the same time, I kind of have to remind myself, okay, but I also think that this is part of the problem, right? That they don't know, and I want to be able to educate them on it. But it's much easier to do when I'm an adult that won't get that type of feedback. I think, Tom, for you at that place and time in your life, it was a lot more difficult. You didn't know what was going on, and those individuals definitely, hopefully, didn't know what was going on for the type of feedback that you got.
Right. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think, my story and my experience is one experience of opening up. And that's not to deter anybody from opening up. I love people being their true, transparent, authentic selves. I preach that to my athletes in the weight room. I want them to be their individual selves. Don't try to be the other people around you. You know, what brings in excellence and this standard of excellence is bringing in different personalities and understanding different dynamics. Like, that's what makes us unique. So be unique. I love that. But just recognize that sometimes you might not get the response that you want. And that doesn't mean that the people are bad people. You know I forgive what they said to me. Obviously, it was, you know, 2 years of real bullying and an experience that I never want to live through again. But you know, they made mistakes that because of how little they were educated about OCD. And, you know, that's why we're here. That's why we're educating. And that's why, you know, we started this Anxiety in Athletes initiative, is because it's crazy to me how uneducated and how little there is about mental health going on in the circle of athletics. From, you know, administration down, I think we need more education, and we need more people with life experiences dealing with mental health speaking out, because now, you know, those people are going to be put in positions to make hires and to run departments and recognize that what kind of needs to be changed. And I think, you know, obviously there is a generational gap that is starting to kind of transform, and we're making progress, but clearly we have a long way to go.
Yeah, definitely. And athletes themselves are considered a vulnerable population at times, right? When you're going from, I guess if any of you have not seen the documentary, The Weight of Gold, it's a great documentary that talks about mental health in Olympic athletes and the struggle that they've dealt with, and the amount of Olympic athletes that have committed suicide because of their mental illness and didn't receive appropriate treatment. And it's mind-blowing to me that athletes at this level weren't able to seek appropriate treatment. And it's a reminder that, wow, we have such a long way to go. Like, there's so many athletes under that tier of Olympic athletes that we have to be able to reduce that treatment gap, I guess, is what I'm saying. And so,
right. Yeah, I think one thing that you said earlier that I want to go back to is that I thought was interesting is, you know, the meal that you said that you have, you know, before races. You know, something struck me, like, you know, that stuff that as a strength coach, like, I would preach, like, we always say, like, have a consistent meal that, you know, doesn't upset your stomach before you compete, you know, or have something that, you know, sits right with you, that kind of thing. And I think it's interesting, you know, how do we tell athletes certain things, but recognize when they become obsessive about it? You know, I think that's something that we kind of have to educate people about, and, you know, having more aware coaches, you know, around athletes, because like you said, they are so much. So when you think about college athletes, especially 18 to 23 years old, usually, think about how, you know, developmentally that's such a crucial age, and people kind of fail to realize, you know, oh, you're 18, you're an adult. But really, I know for males, our brain are, you know, maturing until age 25 or 26. So it's like, wow, here's this, you know, people thinking that these people are adults, but really they're still, you know, in a developmental stage, and they are kind of fragile. And so I think just making sure that we have coaches in these situations and in these, you know, populations that are more aware with mental health is going to be so vitally important for these athletes.
Yeah, and having the coaches look at their levels of distress too. Like, if a coach is noticing that an athlete is getting stuck doing something, being able to pull them aside and say, oh, it looks like you're struggling a bit more than you should with this, and then point them in the right direction for mental health resources so that they can be preventative. And I want to add to that, there are certain things that athletes have to do in order to perform at their best, right? So, like Tom, like you said, it's really good for an athlete to get on a healthy schedule for eating if they're about to compete. And that's not something that they should avoid in order for it to exacerbate their symptoms, right? So like there's this fine line between, okay, like I have to do some of these things, and I also just need to recognize that those are vulnerable triggers for me. But you don't want to get to this point of avoidance either of, okay, well, I'm just not going to eat a healthy meal before a competition ever because I don't want it to turn into a compulsion, because people can go too far that way, and that's still considered a compulsion if you're altogether avoiding. And so the advice I always give patients is that you never want to live OCD's life. You want to live your life, and try to do your best to make sure that you're making decisions based off values. So if you value competing and doing well, like, okay, it was a recommendation of a coach or a performance and strength coach to eat a healthy meal before the race, and just be aware that, okay, that could easily turn into a compulsion. So let me just remember to do my exposures afterwards. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, just to touch on that, I think, earlier in the show, I'm saying, what's the fine line between, we're always ingrained to work. And I want to take a step back and say, I'm all about work, right? I think, having a great work ethic is a characteristic of a athlete that's at a high level. I don't know a lot of athletes that I've been around at the D3, D2, D1 level that, didn't have a high work ethic and were successful. You know what I mean? So I think, there's something to be said about having that high work ethic, but like you were just talking about, kind of understanding the fine line between having a strong work ethic or being in bed and needing to go back to the gym to get extra shots up or whatever it is, recognizing that the work is the work and it'll always be there, and there's a time and place. But once not bringing it home with you and kind of recognizing what the fine line is. And the same thing goes with nutrition and effort, attitude, all those different things. I preach those things to my athletes, but I also want to make sure they recognize what's healthy about it and what can turn into unhealthy obsessions about it. And, one of those things that I use as a strength coach is just a readiness. People underestimate just having conversations with their athletes. I feel like there's this whole authoritative, figure with coaches, whereas, you want to make sure there's that boundary of respect, right? There's, the coach to player relationship is very interesting. You want to make sure there's that boundary and that respect level for the coach to the player and the player to the coach. But at the same time, we need to be able to feel like we can talk to these athletes. So acting like, a macho man, like telling them that they're weak and that kind of thing, that's not going to help us build that relationship and that rapport with the athlete. So I think one thing that I've kind of gotten into is sending out a Google form with a daily, a weekly readiness scale, and kind of what that does is it's just a quick assessment. It takes like 5 to 10 minutes, and all it is just multiple choice rating scales of how was your stress this week, how was your fatigue this week, how was your muscle soreness this week, how was your mood this week. And then I can gather that data and just understand where people are at. It's half the battle of understanding how people are doing and getting them to perform and want to perform at their best is to understand, what's going on internally that they're not, kind of portraying outside of them, and, keeping what they're keeping themselves, and understanding that they can trust you and you can trust them, and understanding that we're more than just coaches. We want to make sure that they understand that we're people they can trust, and obviously keeping that respect level. But I think it's important to understand that you have to just talk to your athletes. You can get a lot of information by just having a simple conversation and showing them that you're a human being first.
Yeah. And I think I can answer this question really quick. How about again, great questions that you're asking. You asked, did we lose Tom? You asked a question about panic and how you can overcome or help someone that's struggling with it to get out of their head. And I think a really good response to this would be to get them out of their head. So if they are panicking, they're probably overanalyzing what's going on, and that's only making the symptoms worse. And so if you can remind them, hey, we're here right now, and we need to move forward in our day and in life. And so what can we do to do that? But if they sit there and they think about all the things that could be going wrong, that's going to hurt and not help.
I love that. No, I love that. Did you ever have, a situation where you felt unable to compete because of a panic attack or anxiety from your OCD?
Yeah. So there were a lot of times leading up to when my symptoms exasperated. I was, when I was 21, I was about to compete at regionals to try to qualify for nationals. And so that is when symptoms went crazy. I was having, 8 to 10 panic attacks a day at least. They were pretty consistent. And I just kept thinking, how in the world am I going to get to the starting line if I am feeling like this? And I would picture myself at the starting line and just standing there and the gun going off and me not being able to move. And so that only made the panic attacks worse. And so somehow this was still before I sought treatment. I was just telling myself, if I just get through this race, everything will get better, because I still hadn't had the diagnosis yet at this point. And so, of course, I got through the race, but did everything get better? Absolutely not. I hadn't received treatment. And so it wasn't until after that doing some of the ERP, the panic attacks really did stop.
Gotcha. Real quick, for everybody listening right now, any piece of advice for athletes, for non-athletes, for parents of athletes, coaches, whoever it is, people struggling with OCD, quick 30-second pitch to for what you'd want to tell them.
I would want to tell them, and this is kind of my go-to every time, that they're not alone and that you can enjoy and love your sport, and you should enjoy and love your sport. And so if something is taking that away, like some type of anxiety or OCD, then you should utilize the resources that are available. IOCDF is a great place to find a therapist that will work for you and make sure that you get that love back, because you deserve it.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, I think mine would be, it's okay to not be okay. And I think when you break it down, why do we play sports? Why do athletes compete? It's because they love the game, or, whatever they're competing in, they love that and they grew up with it, or, it gave them, peace of mind almost, while they were competing. So I think it's important to remember that, never lose the joy for the sport that you're competing in. Real quick, let's just make sure that we mention, you can check out the upcoming live streams, Chris's Corner, Just Ethan, join the Peace of Mind virtual community at iocdf.org/peace of mind. There you can view the live stream schedule, submit topics and questions for future events. Cali, thank you so much for coming on again. Giving us a lot of your time, but you have a lot to offer. Everybody go buy Cali's book. It's worth it. Probably the best children's book ever written. So make sure you go get that. Also, go to check out How About a Beer. You were awesome today. Honestly, you really brought life to this webcast. So I hope you're here next time in 2 weeks. Make sure we go to the website, anxietyinathletes.org. Take our needs assessment. We need more responses. We're trying to gather data to hear what you guys want, what you guys need out of our initiative and out of our website. Parents, coaches, athletes, all of you, we want to make sure that we're hearing you and giving you what you need. That's what we do here at the IOCDF. We are for advocacy and for the people. We want to make sure that everybody's getting what they need, All right. So everybody, thanks so much for joining us. I know I had a great time. Cali, thanks so much for your time. And, good luck with your competition and your future endeavors. I'm sure we'll be seeing you quite often.
Yes, most definitely. Thanks for everything. It's an honor to always be here.
Thank you.